Okay, welcome back. I think we've all talked to each other and know each other a bunch at this point, at least three of the four of us. And maybe the thing to do is just do quick go-arounds about where people are in terms of our active learning activities. So I'm the email guy. I'm Mike Liniak, Hamden Sydney College, chairing the steering committee for this group since its inception. And actually, it's a really interesting time right now for my introductory level biology class, sort of, especially thinking about what this paper that we read for today is about. Thinking about, I guess I would have what's called an interactive lecture. It's not totally student-centered, it's not didactic, it's definitely in the middle somewhere, but thinking about how to incorporate particular activities into my class and the best ways to do that, especially for non-majors. I have a very interesting mix of both majors and non-majors in this class. Sue, we'll do you next.
Oh, okay. I'm Sue. I'm the other email guy.
Yeah.
I send lots of them. I'm not technically teaching, but I do meet with two groups of honor students this semester. And I'm pretty much given a curriculum I'm expected to go through with them. So we only meet 8 times a semester, and we're not going to meet for another couple of weeks. So I haven't thought a whole lot about how to make that experience more interactive. Mm-hmm. They come from all different majors. They don't get credit for this thing, but they have to do it as part of honors requirements.
Oh, wow.
So the motivation for them being there is often pretty low.
Yeah.
We've had some interesting interactive moments, but man, it's like pulling teeth. So I have to think about that some more.
I was about to say, you're starting from a deficit there, so any activity you can come up with is a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, joining us from his living room closet, Greg.
Yes, hello, coming to you live from the closet. Greg Crowther, Everett Community College, north of Seattle. In general, you all have probably heard me talk a lot about test question templates or TQTs, which I remain very fond of. But you know, the limitation of an individual TQT is one TQT doesn't necessarily make for a great classroom discussion because it's so quick. So my goal for this fall is to build in discussion ready things that are a little longer than a single TQT into my slides. So I need to do that. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Cool, thank you. Joining us from somewhere in Eastern Europe with his disrupting camera is Carlos. I'm allowed to say this because I've been in a meeting with him earlier today, and he made reference to it himself. So I feel free to.
I broke more technology this week, and IT now looks at me like a test case for, oh, we've never seen this. Good job, Carlos. So I'm Carlos. I'm in at the biotechnology program at North Carolina State, and yeah, Mike, what did I?
Yeah, we were just talking about just the sort of active learning stuff we've been engaged with at the moment.
At the moment, I've been trying to do active learning through synchronous sessions on Zoom with teams, and I really enjoy that. I've been trying to limit myself to one activity that's a retrieval practice at the beginning, and then a really mini overview of what they were supposed to watch, and they've been watching the videos, so I'm happy and I shouldn't complain. And then do worksheets in groups, but have students really be kind of interdependent and share with each other. And that's going back to that debrief is something I've been really working on this semester.
How'd your REU turn out, by the way?
I spent a summer in front of a computer doing a virtual REU with 13 fantastic students. But I had, it was it was intense for Carlos because I did not realize how it was a lot of keeping people and mentors engaged, and I love it. Plus, I ended up saying yes to 4 students and mentoring 4 different projects, and we ended up with something like 44 different events we did over the summer on Zoom.
Wow.
With weekly seminar series, convince people to do workshops, and I've learned that I like troubleshooting, but not troubleshooting computer issues over Zoom.
Yeah.
That is a test in patience.
It's one of those, like, I mean, there's a broken record now, but I think we're eager to have some in-person meetings come back. We're looking at hosting our State Science Academy here in a month, and one of our, I guess a month and change actually, and one of my colleagues is like, maybe we should be virtual. I'm like, no, unless like literally some new vaccine resistant strain is coming to kill us all, we're having this meeting in person, at least in some form. Finally, Christina, how are you?
Hi guys. So I'm Christina Mora. I am an Aracta Merit Scholar at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I am part of the Palm Network here as a mentee.
We've been reaching out the last couple of years to the Aracta group. So every time I hear an Aracta person, I'm super excited. Welcome.
Yeah. I have shared, I guess if you had, I know this generally Palm is kind of, in its last few cycles, but I've let
in its current state. I don't think we're going away, but yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I've let my fellow scholars here at least at UAB know.
Thank you.
But so yeah, this semester, or I guess last October, I had a course proposal accepted for the Honors College. So this semester I'm teaching a course that I've entitled The Research on How You Can Be Successful in College, because while other people were focused on the fact that faculty don't know about this research, I was frustrated that it seems that no one was telling the students about the research.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that was a disservice, and had the platform to at least offer it to honors students here at UAB. And we're 3 weeks in and orchestrated this class very student-centered. And I think I need to pull it back a little bit to be able to really put in more meat and like guide the conversations better, so that we're coming to a productive conclusion and not just having the students exchange thoughts. Because that's definitely, sometimes those classes have been wonderful. Other times the classes haven't really ended where it's important for them to end. Like, we had a discussion on what research is, and many of the students definitely left the class still very strongly convinced that Googling counted as research. And so I need to kind of rebalance the class priority between being student-centered and conversational and discussion-based, and making sure that we're intellectually going forward in what their understanding of the topics are.
I was just reading a piece this morning, as I'm sure you all have, about those who don't want to get vaccinated, and their reply is always, well, do your research. I've done my research. And it's basically that exact same definition that you're giving there. And that also actually answers the question I was about to ask, which was the type of stuff you would talk about. I know there's other sort of 1 credit intro to college opportunities at a lot of schools, but what you're talking about sounds like more of a intro to scholarship type class, or intro to scholarly work.
So the class focuses on the intersection between their personal student identity and what the research shows on how that identity is impacted in their academic trajectory. And so we've talked about topics like, what is identity, what is science, what is research, what is culture, how do these things all play and interact? And that's been kind of the first 3 weeks of just, what are the meat of our topics? What are our definitions of our terms moving forward? And next week will be like how to read a paper. and a poll on what topics of identity do we want to cover in the research. And then I will find a paper for us to read each week for them to discuss on like the real meat of research. What does this research say about how this identity impacts what strategies they can use to be successful in college?
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. That sounds really exciting. And I'm now going to pull up. Why am I not given a choice? Oh, I know why. Look, somewhere on my computer is the thing we're going to look at today. There it is. Okay. Those of us who have been with POM a while are very near and dear to this topic. And those of us working on our current POM manuscript are exceedingly well aware of this topic. The idea of what COPUS can and cannot do. This seemed an especially relevant thing for us to talk about because COPUS was our preferred, or at least our selection for assessment of our original work here in the POM network. A bunch of us are looking at different directions POM could go in the years to come, potential new funding opportunities. And so we are considering the different ways assessment might look under these new incarnations. But this has served our purpose in terms of understanding whether active learning changes are taking place as a result of POM. Understanding how it works with respect to POM is always challenging, as Sue always reminds us, because no two POM mentorships are alike. Durations are different. The way in which pre and post videos are taken are different. I think we've had instances where a pre-video is taken in one section and a post video in another section. So there's Carlos, you have to see to that. So we do as well as we can here in terms of our pre and post data collection. But what this paper gets at is what COPUS can do and maybe what some of the limitations of COPUS are. Also attached to this is a rebuttal letter, or not rebuttal, but a supplemental letter that was sent in by one of the people who was helping in the origination of COPUS with his thoughts on what COPUS, here it is right here, what COPUS should and should not be used for. So we'll come to this response. But this particular paper attempts to use COPUS to correlate with different kinds of formative assessment. And so the paper describes a series of different ways that one could consider formative assessment, how it might work for you, what it's doing in your particular class. So the other day we had a conversation about this and it was fun, so we'll try it again here. This idea of formative assessment in your classes, when you're looking to get a sense of how things are going, know what the students are learning, not learning, what do you guys use for formative assessment techniques?
Lately?
I'll take anything, Carlos, but yeah, lately is probably good.
So in person times, I love doing little quizzes that were no stakes. So I wouldn't call them quizzes. I would call them, it's all about the branding. I would call them checks or knowledge checks or retrieval practice checks.
You give them check plus, check, and check minus. Those are fun.
And that was my happy face sticker. I used to have a thumbs down, and I noticed that was bad practice.
Did you really? Yeah.
I did have a thumbs down back there. Now I'm honestly using the chat. It's been fantastic to just put up a question and say it's a thought question of how do these two concepts relate, or how does this relate to your project, and let them, give them 1 minute and then say go, hit submit, and that gives me hopefully a good sense of how far we are from our target or how close.
I've become a convert to the small, like, let's have the little inconsequential or little consequential quiz at the start of the class. And if you do bad on a small series of them, no big deal. But if you like biff every single one of them, it would start to add up. And that's been, I think, effective for me in getting some understanding. So yeah, I like a variation on your idea. Greg.
Yeah, I think my formative assessment got way better during my Palm Fellowship, thanks in part to the program and my mentor. So two things. One is essentially clicker questions, so pretty similar in spirit to what Carlos was just saying. And then the other thing is a muddiest point kind of thing where the day, as a pre-lecture assignment, one of their questions is always, what from the previous lecture is still muddy to you? And if several people comment on the same thing, or if even a couple sometimes, then I will say, okay, this is a general issue. Let's revisit it again.
Makes sense.
I've used in Zoom, I like using the polling feature also, and Mentimeter, which can be used either in person or virtually, just to pose real simple kinds of questions. But chat is good for longer things. If I'm really in a classroom, I'll send them to the whiteboards and tell them to draw something or diagram something or list something or write a definition of something.
Excellent.
For the days of whiteboards being with us. But I guess you could do that also on I've just forgotten the name of the program. There's one that uses little sticky notes, basically, that you can tack up and people can see what everyone else is doing. That's one, yeah.
Is Mural and Jamboard do that?
Jamboard. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm a Jamboard guy.
Jamboard's fun.
Yeah.
I like it.
And I feel like usually I'm learning from other people. I've had a couple experiences where I do Jamboard and other people I'm with, I'm like, wow, that's cool. I want to use this. I'm like, oh, so that clearly hasn't penetrated the universe like some of the other applications have. So this paper tries to correlate ideas like this to COPUS and the idea of getting profiles. And I don't know if anyone's tried this, copusprofiles.org, of actually taking COPUS data, running it through an online tool and generating one of 7 different instructional profiles or 3 instructional styles. And you'll see that in this paper. So can we take the profiles that we get out of COPUS, COPUS profiles, compare that to what's being done in these intro bio classes and see how the correlation goes, is basically the gist of what we're going to look at here. And so here are the setups for 2 different instructors teaching a couple different sections of this intro biology course in 2 different varieties of classroom, lecture hall, and then a scale-up classroom. It's mentioned this was done at a large research-intensive university in the upper Midwest that I am assuming is the University of Minnesota, but I could be wrong about that.
No, it's not actually.
That's shocking.
I know, it's shocking to me too,
Yeah.
because we have all the scale-up classrooms in there.
And as soon as it said upper
But we don't
Midwest,
have a
I'm like, oh,
biology
must be.
course. What? We
You
don't have a
upper
biology course
Midwest.
with that number.
Now this is in the Minnesota system, I think. It's Moorhead, Minnesota State Community and Technical. So maybe it's inspired by, I don't know. Yeah, that's utterly shocking.
Yeah, that's
North Dakota. Yeah, that's also.
it could be North Dakota.
Yeah. The description, I'm like, oh, well, I've been in that classroom, right? But it's maybe not that one. So what you have here are the outcomes from what you are getting through the COPUS profiles. The classification in terms of style, didactic for D, interactive lecture for I, student-centered for S, and then the number refers to the particular COPUS profile, the COPUS cluster in which the data came. So the first observations looking at this is it's pretty much all over the board in terms of the types of classes you get, the profiles that you get, even though you're in common class and you have one of two instructors. So there's not a very fixed style, nor would you particularly expect there to be a fixed style day to day in terms of what the contents of a given class was. But this gives you what the COPUS instruction is saying and what the didactic or interactive or what the style of the class is as well. And so this is your first taste into what will be a fairly repetitive discussion in this paper, which is not seeing significant correlations between some of the COPUS data and some of the formative assessments, although we haven't touched on a formative assessment just yet. Here, you start to see a description of how formative assessment is going to be looked at with respect to this class. They take a generous approach here. Basically, anything beyond any questions, 3-second pause and going on, is considered some form of formative assessment in the form of, you see here, praise or encouragement, verbally describing description, clarification, evaluation, shaping of behavior, and then prompting students to explore or elaborate on ideas. So these are some of the responses in terms of formative assessment that they are looking for. And we covered some of these ideas in our own brief discussion already. And so we're going to see a series of data here related to looking at how these styles relate to what's coming out of the different COPUS assessments. And so you see here the variety of instructor-generated feedback, and you see here the layering of this on top of individual instructor A, instructor B sessions, and whether they were branded by COPUS as student-centered, as interactive, and didactic. And basically what we're looking for is some kind of trend, something that would say, okay, in the student-centered style, the instructor-generated feedback would have a distinct appearance on this graph, and in other places, it would have a different appearance. And so you see here the relative percentage in which you had praise, in which you had encouragement, shaping, you saw the least, that probably would require the most work, so that makes sense. And the take-home message that the authors want you to get from this particular figure and the ones coming behind it is you're pretty much seeing a consistent result up and down, and you're not seeing specific profiles tailored to specific COPUS learning styles. And so that is the significant take-home, I think, of this paper, but this is sort of your first instance of getting to a consideration of that. So I don't know if anyone has particular thoughts with respect to this comparison they'd like to share here with the type of feedback that you give as opposed to the type of class that you might teach. If you're in the midst of doing your particular class, how often do you find yourself in praise versus trying maybe to prompt or encourage further thought in discussions? Greg?
Yeah, so this all seems fine and good. I read this paper quickly as usual. Did they sort of quantify the extent of feedback as well as the breakdown? Because to me, that was sort of maybe the first thing I would check is I assume that a didactic style allows for less feedback, which we might say is a problem or an issue if we think feedback is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Did they try and do that?
I don't believe so, or at least it's not documented here. Like, it's just a matter of getting a number, like a relative amount.
Yeah, or maybe it's sort of self-evident, like that obviously the didactic one doesn't cover as much total feedback. I don't know, but that's the figure I would have made first.
The other thing to point out in this figure as well is the relative random distribution of where instructor A falls and where instructor B falls. It's not a matter of a particular tendency of one instructor to do one thing and another instructor to do another thing. They both seem capable and willing to do both, all three types of styles.
Mm-hmm.
So we can look at this slightly differently. Frequency of the, I thought I was going to remember. Yes, the elaboration, EXP, expand. So frequency of the instructor EXP within each class. And so it's another, it's a honed in look, but it gives you another sense of not seeing much of a correlation. Although it is interesting, you notice that under the didactic style, instructor B tends to use this type of phrase or use this type of feedback. In the interactive style, instructor A seems to tend to use this phrase. So that speaks more to a personal preference, which is an interesting one that seems to come out in these charts. And then when you move over to student-centered, it's a little more evenly distributed. But again, the profile that I think they were hoping to see, or the signature that they were hoping to see, is not here. So continue on, look at this in terms of the formative assessment with respect to Bloom's composition. And so we have knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, evaluation, and synthesis. And if we look at it in the three styles, what do we see in terms of patterns in the student-centered and interactive environment? And once again, not much to report in terms of a precise signature that can be tied to a distinct style. And then we look at this in a little more detail down here, looking at specific class sections. These were class sessions done in the same semester under the same classified style, just with the two different instructors, and then examining the composition of the feedback as well as the Bloom's composition of the prompts, and not seeing particular combinations that would indicate COPUS as a predictor, right? Okay. So basically what this paper is getting at, just to remind you of the title, interpret with caution. And so the paper is overall trying to argue that pulse is fine, that COPUS is fine and good, but that COPUS is not showing correlation to these particular practices. And if I look at formative assessment styles and I look at what COPUS is telling me, it does not appear that COPUS is able to suggest a particular preference, if you will, for a type of formative assessment, or to correlate a type of formative assessment to a variety of class, at least with respect to the way COPUS profiles, analyzes, and generates these particular clusters. Okay. And that brings you to the letter. Oh, that's the wrong paper. There we go. Here's the response that Carl Wieman at Stanford sends us, and he is somebody who was part of the COPUS process. And I'll just quote here: "There is an increasing tendency to see COPUS results as a general measure of teaching quality and as a tool to be used in teaching evaluations. McConnell et al. Provide data showing that there are some specific important differences in teaching that COPUS fails to distinguish, but here I want to emphasize this conclusion applies more generally. As discussed in the fine print of the original COPUS article, but now frequently overlooked, the COPUS was created from the beginning to be an instrument with quite limited capabilities in order to meet some very pragmatic constraints. It is important that users of the COPUS recognize these limitations." So clearly this is not his first trip to the rodeo and explaining this to people.
It's certainly not the first time I've encountered Carl explaining this, which is why I channel him so often.
You can probably hear him saying this. Yeah.
I can hear his voice saying it, yeah.
That this is not a long piece. Like I said, this is a response article. And so he says here, I'm trying to find where he describes it a blunt instrument. Here we go. Through this process, we determined that no existing protocol met these needs. As we developed our own protocol that would meet the constraint of good interpreter reliability with modest training, we found it necessary to make it simpler and simpler, essentially making it a blunter and blunter instrument. And so Sue could speak to this a little bit, because Sue was responsible with Palm for getting the people that would watch the COPUS videos and get the data for us. So could you talk a little bit about what you had to do for the training of getting their undergrads, I believe, getting students to watch these videos and collect the data?
Right, and the training is usually only about an hour long. And I use one that a postdoc who was with us for a while had put together for people at Duquesne University. And it shows excerpts, little snippets, 5 or 7 or 10 minutes long, and asks people to code them. And you get back together and decide whether you're in agreement or not, and how far off you are. And if you're doing this seriously, you can figure out the percentage of agreement and the usual sort of rough statistics. If you're 95% in agreement, that's probably good enough for what you want to be able to do with COPUS. So training is very minimal. One thing I'm gonna, again, sort of channel Carl. I'm wondering if he's reacting to the title of the main article as much as its content.
Mm-hmm.
The content isn't so biting, but the title of it, I think, is a little bit nasty. Because it's it's assuming that you're going to interpret it a certain way, and it's telling you not to do that, when in fact maybe you weren't going to be trying to interpret it.
And it's sort of like when people write columns for the New York Times or something, and somebody else, now this isn't the case here, somebody else writes the headline, and then the headline doesn't actually match what the content says. Mm-hmm. And so in this case, they probably wrote their own headline, but it does have a tone to it, right?
Yeah. Because COPUS never talks about practice that supports student learning, not directly anyway.
And how does COPUS talk about feedback? Because they're all instructor and observations of instructor and student behavior. I'm trying to find.
Carlos, it really doesn't. It talks about answering students, engaging them in discussion. So there's nothing, I don't think there's any, one of the codes may talk about feedback, but
there's like posing. I was trying to look for my code thing, but it's different desk. There's posing a question, but really I'm interested in how they came up with their feedback. Where were they going with their feedback thing?
The original COPUS or this paper?
This paper.
The other thing is that it's so selective, because instructional styles that support student learning include things besides feedback. So they're only looking at one aspect of supporting student learning anyway. So I have a lot of trouble with the title. I think it's misleading or inaccurate, or just not indicative of what they're actually talking about in about 3 different ways.
We're not used to clickbait in our field, but we have that. And I was wondering if other people here had experience with the COPUS profile site in actually taking COPUS data and using it to generate those profiles. Like if you see a certain combination of codes, it would suggest a didactic course or an interactive lecture course. I'm not familiar. I was aware that this was a thing. I think, Carlos, you probably sent me the paper when it first came out. But I didn't, have any of you actually tried that as a tool?
I just know in general, if it's more than 80% lecturing, it's just put down as didactic, no matter what else you do. I don't know. I don't remember the cutoffs for the other things.
When we look at, and maybe, and I'll lean on Sue being here as we person who helped or did write the original proposal. Historically, how did we land on COPUS as our primary assessment tool for PALM?
We needed something, we knew it was easy
Yeah.
to train people to do it.
And that's the trade-off, right?
And right, and the honest truth is that PALM never guaranteed effective active learning. PALM just wanted to introduce people to active learning, certainly with the hopes and with guidance to get them to make it effective. But you can't be effective unless you actually do it first.
Exactly.
So the first step was, are people actually doing something besides lecturing? So baby step.
Well, and I'm part of another group looking to do cures in protein biochemistry. And one of the goals of that group is to do hypothesis design. And they use the experimental design assessment test, or EDAT, and did an entire NSF proposal with it, and came to the end of their funding cycle, and their relationship with EDAT was sort of our evolving relationship with COPUS, the same idea, that it provides some information, it gives some evidence that something is happening, but you start to see the limitations of that particular tool, and that you are trading in some case the ease of use with maybe the results you can get out of it. It doesn't make it a bad thing, it just means you need to understand what the tool can and cannot do.
I'm probably, or I'm almost certainly, the most junior in terms of experience here, but I guess because I'm coming at this from a bench science microbiology past life, my approach with all of these tools is always that you need multiple types of data to draw a conclusion. That one tool, like you would never just run a Western and call it like call the question answered. You always need to have the Western and the microscopy and the animal model all agreeing to things. And so to me, I haven't used COPUS because the studies I have done so far have focused on like student understanding, and I've been querying what the students are experiencing. But I've always wanted to make sure that I'm asking questions and approaching data by multiple avenues. So I think COPUS can be one of them, but I guess, is it more common than I'm understanding to use just one thing to draw a conclusion?
I don't think so. I think what you're getting here, I mean, and in fact, what this paper I think is trying to do is make conclusions with a combination of COPUS data, with feedback, with formative assessments, and finding the correlation wanting. But ideally, I think what the paper would, I get what the authors would want to see is something where you would have a multi-tool way of seeing a trend in how effective active learning is being done. So you wouldn't bet the whole house on it. And as Sue suggested, for our purposes in PALM, we just wanted some validation that active learning was taking place. And in fact, what we have found in the manuscript that we're working on and have worked on for some time is that when push came to shove in trying to analyze PALM's efficacy, looking at COPUS data, it was limiting. And we have gone a direction now in recent weeks or months at this point, where we're relying more on interviews and on gleaning and coding interviews, because frankly, that is a much richer source of information than what the COPUS itself can provide. So I think it's a good point, Christina. I think anything involving human psychology, sociology, things like that, by definition is going to be harder to get with multiple instruments. That said, you still don't want to rely on a single tool.
And PALM doesn't rely just on COPUS either, because it has the whole series of surveys that come through APS, and it had a series of semi-structured interviews done through APS, separate from what we're doing for this manuscript.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, those of you who've had maybe more experience collecting this kind of data, are you aware of other tools that maybe get more at not just if active learning is taking place, but the quality of student outcomes. I mentioned the EDAP before as sort of a similar tool with good potential, but also limitations in what it can tell you. And that's specifically for if you're interested in experimental design and the ability of your undergraduates to formulate a sound hypothesis. Other tools that you guys may have used, just for my own interest, that maybe get more at the outcomes that could come out of an active learning experience.
More from the instructor side,
Okay.
we dabbled, and I opened my mouth and got some people excited about it, and then I regret doing it. But we dabbled in DART, the decibel, basically the recording of instructors, and I was the guinea pig for 2 semesters, recording instructor audio and using Kimberly Tanner's system for classifying silence and active. And that was, I think it was successful in the sense that I was reflecting on it. I'm like, oh yes, there's not much silence. I chat. But there's no student impact side or student outcomes. And lately, I've been looking into. Our IRB is great and overworked, but I've been trying to use. Both Claire and I have been trying to use more quote validated surveys because it makes it easier with our IRB, and we don't know how to write questions. We've come to that conclusion. And I've been impressed with that there are so many tools to look at self-efficacy or in my interest now, online readiness and the usability. But those are all self-perceptions or self. So going back to the student outcomes, I haven't found much, and maybe I don't know most likely I don't know what I'm looking for.
I've used some of the concept inventory questions, not the whole inventory, but the last big quiz that they'd have in the class before a final exam, which is never multiple choice. There'd be the multiple choice questions pulled from various concept inventories. Use those for comparison from one year to another.
Which actually gets to a larger scale, I think, question or consideration here, as always, which is what are your desired outcomes, right? The concept inventories get at the idea of what the name concepts in it, right? Like what concepts are being mastered, what are you maybe not getting across as well. The other question, I've mentioned the EDAT a couple times, that's a skill, right? That's a particular scientific skill you hope you could pick up. And that's a different thing, obviously, than just the content of a course. So I guess when I ask about these tools, that's another, clarification, is that clearly not all tools are created equal depending on what you want to get out of your class. So as always, aligning, if I remember anything from doing biology scholars a few years ago, aligning your assessments to what it is you actually want to get is paramount here. So as you're thinking of things to supplement COPUS data with, what would you do to get that complete picture? Like, is active learning taking place, but also what is the quality of the active learning taking place? I would say, and Carlos knows this too, as we're thinking about the vision and change proposal we hope to put together by March, pray for us. What tools will we use? It's precisely the question we have to ask. What are the tools we will use to get at those questions in this sort of different incarnation of POM going forward?
One extremely time-consuming method that we have used in our Foundations of Biology course, which is not the University of North Dakota one, our students write a proposal as a team.
Oh, wow.
And so you might have up to 18 of these proposals, and there's a very extensive rubric that goes with them. But the whole point is to get at whether students have grasped experimental design concepts, whether they understand how to approach a problem, what would you use to determine if you're successful, what are the repercussions of being successful or not successful with this project. So lots of a combination of concepts and skills, but as I said, very time consuming because students turn in drafts of each section of the proposal as they go, and then they get final grade on the final project. So the grading of them is what turns a hair gray.
Any other thoughts on this particular paper? I mean, it's a very interesting discussion and one that's very pertinent to us in this network, given our use of it over the past several years. And I think Sue brings a good point about the headline, the clickbait, whatever. This is not meant to dump on Palm. I think Palm has served us well in terms of what we want to get from it. But what we choose to do with it and how far we take that analysis becomes the point of what this whole discussion is.
So I guess my question is, I understand that Palm is a small piece of all of your roles, and so you wanted to use COPUS as a very accomplishable tool to evaluate Palm. But if you had more resources and more time to evaluate it, what would you have added to COPUS to get more out of your evaluations? Like,
I think we would have proposed doing what we are doing right now, which is interviewing people.
Yeah.
And getting after the fact. And we've deliberately not chosen anyone who's finished up within the last year or so. We want a little bit more of a historical perspective, the longer view. And I think I'm grateful for Mike to suggesting we do this kind of manuscript, even though the original intent has been totally changed as we've gone along. It's
been really interesting. It's like the most evolved project I've ever been involved in, because like if you looked at how we started this project a year ago and where we are now in terms of this manuscript construction, it's just a completely different direction, but it's been very fruitful in sort of what we put together. And we're all learning how to code as we go along, which is something like only like one or two of us had any experience with beforehand. So the problem, Christina, too, that we have with Palm, and that it's a deliberate, it's not a problem in terms of what our mission is, but it is a problem when it turns around to try to assess it, is that we are not limited to a single discipline. We are not limited to a single goal. And so it's hard for us to say we would use this concept inventory or we would use this set of tools, because the particular intervention or the particular mentorships that have happened have themselves had very distinct goals. That's why, to Sue's point, I think the individual interviews are our best chance to sort of capture what it is that's happened with Palm and what's going well and what's not. If we chose to refine, if we chose to narrow our focus, I think some more specific tools could come into play for us.
Yeah, Palm as a program has also evolved on its own. I mean, we didn't dream we'd be including chemistry, and now chemists make up a sizable chunk of our membership.
Our Palm From's work with people actually electing to do DBER stuff is something we never thought of and has gone really well. So,
question here. So up to now, I haven't been paying a ton of attention to the like, what's the next grant going to be like and all that. I mean, I've listened, but I've forgotten everything. but just now, I can sort of see the one possible arc, and I'm wondering whether that corresponds at all to what you, Mike and Carlos, maybe are actually working on. So in my mind, at least, Palm 1 was like, move instructors toward active learning and document that with COPUS. But just as Sue said, we didn't promise it would be good active learning. So then the next phase could be like, okay, good, we're moving the needle on active learning. Now we're going to maybe make sure it's effective or work
Yep.
on the quality of active learning. Is that kind of the idea of where you're
Yep.
going? Or?
That's exactly where we're going.
Oh,
So
so the manuscript feeds right into that then.
yeah, there
Yeah, that's
are,
great.
so just because, and this is actually really neat because a lot of people were interested in grantsmanship and working on the next stuff. And I'm frankly getting a little burnt out writing proposals. So I'd like to step back a little bit off that too. We actually have 3 separate working groups working on 3 parallel proposals, only one of which will go in 2022. We have the benefit of no cost extensions that will keep us funded at least through 2022. And I think we're cautiously optimistic on 2023, at least part of it. So there is a solicitation right now for it's called Vision and Change in Undergraduate Education. So basically what's out there that shows the efficacy of vision and change. And so what you just said is exactly what we're trying to do for that vision and change solicitation. And that's the one that's most time sensitive. They did the first round of funding. The proposals were due last March, which means the proposals that got funded are just emerging, so we can see what they funded. The next funding date is March of 22, and beyond that we don't know. So like we really do want to get something in for this. We're also looking at a follow-up RCN that would take is loosely inspired by the Pulse Ambassadors program, if you're familiar with that. And I could there's more detail, but obviously we're not just going to copy it, like there's details there. And we have another group that's looking at IU's questions in general. And both of those are looking more long-term, like 2023 submissions, because there's time, right? So just take the time to actually get the ideas together and see where things are going. So yes, we are thinking about that. And if you're actually interested in helping out a little more, just send me an email.
Yeah, I think I will. I mean,
Cool.
I'm still not going to dive in and be
I know it's
the figurehead or the PI, but now that I can see the progression,
yeah,
I feel a little more invested and a little more interested.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you guys on a Friday. It's always good to get people in here to do this. As always, if you have suggestions for papers to discuss, things that you see popping up in the literature that you think we all should discuss as a network, please send those on to me and we'll get that to the whole group. All right. Have a good weekend, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.